Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Vertical Space, a podcast at the intersection of technology and flight. We are your hosts, Jim Barry and Luka Tomjanovic, and here we look at the most important forces shaping the market of advanced air mobility, with a particular focus on why and how they matter to those building a business in this very exciting and growing industry.
This industry is multiple trillion dollar industry. This is about completely replacing road-based delivery for every single product that people consume on a regular basis. So it ain't some novelty, luxury, kind of sideline circus show. This is completely replacing the way we move products around.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Vertical Space. For those of you who know Bobby Healy, you know he's a proven and remarkable entrepreneur and industry innovator. He has started and sold successful companies and is now pioneering service delivery with his startup Manna, a drone delivery as a service business with the mission to improve the world by making lightning-fast suburban deliveries affordable, green, and safe. Listen to what makes Bobby special, how Manna delivers value today, their tech stack, their essential value and competitive advantages, his comments on certification, how they plan to scale, and the advantages of delivering in Europe and their plans to operate outside of Europe. Additionally, listen to qualities he looks for in his new hires, the advice he gives to those starting a business, and those he turns to for advice. Fast-moving, full of great content for our entrepreneurs, investors, and industry professionals, or for some of our audience who are just stimulated by new ways to address old problems. There are certain common qualities of all great innovators and business pioneers. See if you can identify those qualities in Bobby in this great podcast. Enjoy.
This episode of the Vertical Space podcast is brought to you by UAvionics. UAvionics is the leader in low size, weight, and power certified avionics for manned, unmanned, and advanced air mobility aircraft. Let UAvionics help you achieve your goals, whether that be type certification, airspace access, or beyond visual line of sight operations. UAvionics has certified and certifiable communications, navigation, and surveillance avionics for your aircraft. So head over to uavionics.com or Google it to see how you can start flying safer and move your platform forward into shared airspace.
Bobby kicked off his career building video games for Nintendo. He then founded Elan Technologies, which he sold 12 years later to Sita. He then built CarTrawler, the world's largest mobility marketplace for airlines, over 15 years and led 2 successful LBOs for the business. For the last 3 years, he's been building Manna, a drone delivery as a service business whose mission is to improve the world by making lightning-fast suburban deliveries affordable, green, and safe. Bobby, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Pleasure.
Welcome, Bobby.
Good to meet you.
Hello. Likewise.
So, Bobby, we asked the same question of our guests for the first. Is there anything that very few in the industry agree with you on?
Oh, the very few in the drone delivery industry agree with me on. Yes, there is. There's many things that many people disagree with me on. Mostly it's around the timing of when this becomes commercially viable and scale becomes real. So particularly if I'm in North America, there's a view there that we're still 3 or 4 years away from scale. And that's largely due to, regulation and the context there around FAA and uncertainty around drone reg timelines. However, when I come to Europe, the regulations are already written. They've gone to the printers and become law 1st of January 23. So the general discourse, if it's US led, is that we're still a few years away. And I disagree with everyone in that. In fact, it's very hard to argue when we're actually flying commercially for 2 years here and, pleasing customers every single day that it's not real. But people still think we're a few years off. And I'm betting that they're very wrong.
How do you define scale, Bobby?
Scale is when you have unlimited ability to grow your business, and your limit is really only a combination of access to capital, primarily access to capital, and then the ability to actually physically scale. So for us, it's not like we're a software business or we're a digital marketing business or digital marketing demand-led business. We have to build the aircraft. We make them ourselves. And even more importantly, we have to put boots on the ground in each of the markets, cities, towns we want to operate in. So there's a really, really difficult scaling problem that we have as a business. So I would say in order of complexity, there's this and building a space station. It's hard. So, the levers for scale are mostly in our control, right? So fundraising, capital, manufacturing, hiring, and the levers outside of our control really are regulatory and policy. And that's where we have a very clear view and almost an unfair advantage by being in Europe and specifically in Ireland as our test ground. We're already operating. We have almost an unlimited, unfettered access to this market that lets us really test our product. But so scaling is definitely, this industry is multiple trillion dollar industry. This is about completely replacing road-based delivery for every single product that people consume on a regular basis. So it ain't some novelty, luxury, it's kind of sideline circus show. This is completely replacing the way we move products around. So when I think about scaling, I think about every single, first world market, every suburb, every high density suburb, and even metro area. And I think about the mammoth task that's involved in that. Couldn't be more excited about it, actually.
Bobby, let's just step back a little bit. Tell us a little bit about Manna. What's the value prop? What makes it unique? Why are you so excited about it?
Just imagine a world where everything can be moved from one place to another place in 3 to 5 minutes at a cost of operation of less than $1 and at scale without needing people to perform that job. I mean, that is essentially what that infrastructure, that simple atomic unit of work, when given to local businesses, local communities, suddenly enables all sorts of demand and all sorts of commerce that didn't exist before. More than half our deliveries today, so we serve about 40,000 people now with the service in Ireland. More than half our deliveries are coffee, right? So cappuccinos, lattes, you name it. And when I think about a simple example, that the ability to deliver coffee doesn't really exist in the world now. I mean, you can deliver coffee a few hundred meters away and it'll be kind of lukewarm, it'll be spilled and very expensive to deliver. And if I just take that one simple case, I think there's proof positive that our infrastructure can start to enable new categories of demand that didn't exist before. And then when I think about, in our last town, which is on the west coast of Ireland, a place called Galway, where we serve 10,000 people, and the local bookstore in that town has a better product than Amazon have to that customer base. That gets me excited because that means that we're democratizing retail and we're making every single offline business an online business simply by giving them a robotic platform. So you really have to think about not as drone delivery. You have to think about, forget about drone delivery. It's just giving every single person, every single business a low cost, high-speed access in a green and safe and private way to 50,000 people in their local vicinity. That's just a pretty powerful piece of infrastructure to build with.
So you're saying somebody's making a coffee and it's being delivered hot to their recipients, and that's the majority of your business today. Could you just walk through how that happens?
Yeah. So we have 3 coffee shops on our platform now. We have 2 local vendors and we have our own coffee. You come into our app, you choose which coffee store you want, you order your cappuccino, your oat milk, whatever it is, the way you want it. That order comes into us. As the order comes in, we allocate a flight slot with one of the aircraft. So we kind of know we break the aircraft up into 10-minute flight slots and then we'll allocate a flight slot. We'll make the coffee and load it on the aircraft there on the roof where the aircraft and the coffee machine are together on the roof. So it takes about, from transaction to arrival, about 5 minutes. Median flight time is 2 minutes 40 seconds in the town where we operate now, which is North Dublin, the capital. And we're about 15 minutes from Dublin Airport. So busy airspace, busy place, the second most densely populated part of Ireland. And you can order coffee, get it to your house in less than 5 minutes. And our delivery fee is less than what currently road-based delivery companies are charging today.
You mentioned the differences in the regulatory landscape between the US and Europe. Can you shine some more light on it?
Yeah, I mean, for whatever reason, I think Europe unusually has an advantage here because it's a highly fragmented. Like there's 500 million customers that live in Europe, and they're regulated centrally by EASA, which is our version of the FAA, and EASA kind of as an umbrella around each individual market within Europe. And what happens is because of that market fragmentation, it's not quite a federal set of states. There's fragmentation there, and that creates competition amongst market-based regulators. That's one part. And then the other part is, again, in terms of policy, government policy, most European governments have said they want drone delivery in their market. They want the jobs that come with drone delivery. They want to increase the GDP that comes with drone delivery. And that seems to have caught on much more strongly in Europe, and particularly a number of markets like Ireland, Switzerland, Poland, where the government has just said, we want these jobs, we want this commerce, and they've pushed regulation to move forward quickly. And that's exactly what's happened. Whereas in the US, I think a much more conservative environment exists, and that's not good or bad. It's just the way it is. It's a much busier airspace in North America as well, in USA, should I say, as well. And therefore, there's a lot more to consider when you're scaling out a system there. And that's kind of it. But I do think that, soon enough, the USA and the FAA will catch up, if not overtake, what's going on in Europe, and look forward to that.
And Manna received the Light UAS Operator Certificate last year, I think. What kind of privileges came with it? Can you talk to how you reduce the overall air-to-ground risk to enable these increasingly complex operations? Perhaps a bit on the kinds of sensors that you carry on board, the ground-based infrastructure that you're leveraging, how you strategically select the routes.
Yeah. And so, a light user cert, which is light unmanned cert, is what we have, and that's a European-wide license to operate at SAIL Level 2. SAIL Level 2 is medium risk category, and this year, at the end of this year, we'll be operating SAIL Level 4, which is full BVLOS operation. So that license is pretty powerful, and it is European-wide. However, we still need to match that with, well, it's not called the type cert over here. It's called design verification. It's essentially a type cert for the aircraft. We don't have that yet, and we'll have that. We aim to have that towards the end of this year. And it's another area where EASA and the European regulators are way ahead of the rest of the world in providing a framework and a structure for us to operate in for that. In terms of infrastructure, ground infrastructure, so first of all, our onboard systems have a huge amount of redundancy in them. So we have multiple flight computers, 3 flight computers. We have 3 GPS units, 3 compasses, pretty much 3 of everything except battery. And even the battery, if our main battery fails, we have a redundant battery that gives about 120 seconds of flight. And then finally, we have a parachute, a pyrotechnic powered parachute. We've never had to use, but it's there. So we have an unusual aircraft that some would say is an over-engineered drone. But it's not, because we think about how do you fly 1 million flights a day uneventfully. We don't think about how do you fly 1,000 flights a day, and we think about 1 million a day, and that's where we need to be. So we've a ton of instruments on there to take care of that. We have scanning LiDAR and radar on the aircraft to allow us to identify objects in the air. When we arrive to deliver at a home, so for folks that don't know, we hover over the home that we deliver to. We hover at about, what is it in feet? It's about 80 feet above the home that we're delivering to. We'll use radar and or LiDAR to make sure that we have a 2-meter diameter flat and inanimate space to deliver on. So the important thing is we've real-time evaluation of the scene in order to deliver, and we're able to make a decision not to deliver and come home if that's required. So that's definitely the most complex part of the operation, because you're flying is ultimately, you're in cruise, you're flying over a populated area. And just for numbers, the population density where we deliver today is 7,500 people per square mile. That's more dense than most of suburban America. So it's a complex operation, but the most complex by far is when we deliver. And the reason that is because we're hovering, usually because we're in Ireland, very strong side winds. We're yawing and banking into a side wind. We're dropping a bag that might be up to 6.5 pounds in weight. We're doing that quite fast. For the first 90% of the descent for the package, it's going very fast, and we're measuring that with LiDAR. And about 12 inches off the ground, we start to slow it down. And all of that's happening while we're trying to maintain position. So it is complex, and we've built a lot of systems, not just redundancy on flight redundancy, but a lot of air redundancy on the actual delivery system. And, it's not perfect yet. We still have work to go, but, being regulated isn't a black and white thing. Being regulated is a story and a time and a relationship with a regulator based on trust and data. And each, set of data points that you collect, and every new 10,000 flights that you do, and each engagement with the regulator lets the regulator have more comfort, more insight into the true risk of the operation. And we now have 95,000 flights completed. And that's, depending on who you ask, that's either a lot of flights or not a lot of flights. It's certainly a lot relative to what anyone else has done, but it's a little in terms of where we need to be. And only when we get to at least 1 million flights in the clock would we be willing to pull the trigger on a scale rollout. And for us, that happens 2023.
So getting to sail for and being able to fly beyond visual line of sight end of this year, what kind of changes do you anticipate you have to do to your concept of operations? Or is it just showing the regulators the data that you've accumulated so far?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. We are ready now to do that. Technically, we are ready. We just don't believe, firstly, we don't need to do that now. So we're quite happy to have observers and do more test flights and collect more data. And our own target to actually fly at sail for is the end of this year. We'll be there for that. There's no technical changes to the aircraft. The big changes that will come still to be defined are around conspicuity, remote ID, things like that. But those are not, well, I won't say that they're not difficult. In fact, I think they're well defined in Europe as well. But finding in each market the service provider and the elected operator of those services in each market potentially could slow things down. But in terms of our own design verification timeline and our own ability to fly BVLOS and ability to be licensed to fly BVLOS, we're very confident that we'll be doing that at the latest, the start of 2023. Yeah, sorry, one thing I forgot to mention on board the aircraft, we have 2 separate LTE connections for C2 across 2 different operators. So one of the things that's very important but not critical to what we do is the connectivity layer, and there again we've got some redundancy in there that gives us comfort.
Are there 2 businesses here? One is the development and the manufacturing of the drones, and the second is the service delivery. Have you ever thought about letting somebody else do the drones and just provide the service?
Yeah, one of our strategy statements is that we're not a drone manufacturer, and that it's not about the drone. However, if you forward wind 5 years, it certainly won't be about the drone. But today, it's a right to exist. Being able to fly safely and securely and have the functionality that's needed is it's a right to play. And none of the commercially available aircraft, the DJIs of this world, none of them are at the reliability levels that we need. They're fantastic products, don't get me wrong, and really amazing, but they don't have the redundancy systems that we need to be able to confidently fly over your family. That's a simple fact. And so therefore we're forced, although it's fun, to design and build our own aircraft. We will, for scale production, we won't be manufacturing them ourselves. We will be outsourcing the manufacture of at least the major things like airframe, avionics bay, and sensors. We will be manufacturing externally at scale. But for now, our business is enabled to move forward by our own IP, and I don't see that changing in the short term.
What do you think that needs to change in the market for this change to occur?
I think the market needs to get to scale. I think, if you're DJI or if you're Unique or any of the big companies producing commercial grade drones, you're looking at demand, and it's, you're not going to, release a product into the market with all this functionality and cost and weight if there isn't demand for it. So I think once the industry starts to scale, and it doesn't need to reach scale, but it needs to show unrestricted appetite for scale, and then you'll see some of the entrants. I would be very surprised if DJI weren't one of those, but you'll see the Chinese coming in with great products, some American companies coming in with great products and willing to sell that technology. That's not a business or a space I want to be in. That's a space that's going to be commoditized, and that is not where the value lies. The value lies in the technology stack above the actual aircraft, and that's where we're playing. We have got the whole stack right up to the consumer for this, and ultimately, if we wanted to, we could slot in anybody's third-party aircraft. In fact, we actually have flown with Unique aircraft wrapped with our software before, but just for safety and reliability, we wouldn't fly it in populated areas.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about that tech stack?
Yeah, so underneath the actual physical flying machine, or inside it, we have an avionics bay, and one part of that flies the actual aircraft, and the other implements the mission control and the connectivity with our cloud services. Our cloud services do all of the route planning, the tactical, or should I say the strategic deconfliction, and the connectivity to UTM providers. And then on top of that, again, you have a layer that connects to third party through API. So what I mean by that is the local coffee shop, the local Tesco, that's the Walmart of Ireland and England, and they connect to it through API, and they allocate an aircraft, and that's all done in our cloud services layer. So if I take you through a consumer order, you order coffee with us, what's happening there is you're using most likely our shopping basket, but we work with third-party shopping baskets. But if you're using our shopping basket, you're ordering your coffee, and that's all of our UI and our middleware. Then that API is calling our flight ops API to allocate a flight slot. Once that flight slot is allocated, when the drone lands and is available and the product is ready to be loaded, then it all kicks over to the drone. The mission is uploaded to the drone, the cargo is loaded into the aircraft, and from that point on, the aircraft is on its own until it lands back again. We've no ability to intervene in the flight other than to abort the flight and send it home. And so all of those components of the tech stack are operating together. And then the final part of it is what we call the dispatch system, where, don't forget, our current operation, we're operating on the roof of Tesco. So we have the supermarket, the grocery store underneath us. We have 5 or 6 vendors that are on the roof with us, and we have our own dark store serving, candy, and we have a deal with Coca-Cola, we have a deal with Samsung, with Ben & Jerry's, a bunch of other dark store deals where we store the product. And so you've got the system where you have fairly complex flight operation happening with 5 or 6 aircraft, landing and taking off together, with flight slots that are a perishable product, right? Because the moment the aircraft lands, you're wasting utilization of that aircraft. Mm-hmm. So we have a really nice queuing and dispatch system that connects the flight ops system to the individual vendors, and that works really, really well. And that's to be honest with you, that's the thing that we've had the most teething problems with in the last 2 years of our operation. The reason that is that you can't test it. You can simulate it all you want, but nothing beats someone dropping a coffee on the way to load it into the drone
right.
to learn about what you need, right? And so sometimes you just have to grow up. You can't just buy old age. And in this case, that's what we've been doing on the freezing cold, windy, rainy roofs of the west coast of Ireland for 2 years.
So Bobby, to reach scale, we talked about reaching scale before. One of the prerequisites, I think, is proving aviation grade safety. What's your plan to reaching that?
That's a really difficult, really super difficult thing to even define, right? So aviation grade safety is documented as somewhere between 10 to the minus 8 and 10 to the minus 9 of, fatalities per operational hour. So you get up in your Airbus or your Boeing, whatever it is, and the number is extremely low that there's going to be harm to a person. And so if we compare ourselves to that level of safety, we're still going to lose. And that's what's unusual about this business. And the reason is that we're going to be flying way more volume and way more flight hours than standard general aviation. So the question is, at what point do we stop trying to be as good as or better than general aviation? And what level is it acceptable for us to have a known risk, right? And so it's very, very difficult. We know what the numbers are, but at some point we have to make the decision to scale the business. So, when we think about it, we say, okay, there's a cascading set of failures that lead to that number, that 10 to the minus number. And the first one is the reliability of the aircraft. How many of the 10 nines do we have on the aircraft now? How many catastrophic failures where the aircraft, for whatever reason, falls out of the sky and the parachute for whatever reason doesn't work, and then intersect that with the population density you're flying over and the size of your aircraft, the weight of your aircraft. So all those variables, if we add them all up now, we're already safer than general aviation, right? However, if we're going to be doing 1 million flights a day or even more, then we're going to have accidents. And the way to think about that is, I think society needs to get used to this technology before we really scale it out in anger. And the parallel there is autonomous vehicles, right? Autonomous drive, autonomous cars, and so on. So there's a blend between, I think, the way aviation approaches this and the way logistics or last mile providers will approach this. But for now, we have a very aviation-like system of managing mitigation. So it's called a hazard matrix. And the hazard matrix essentially lists all of the things that can go wrong, all of the parts on the aircraft that can go wrong, all of the ways that can go wrong. What is the mitigation for each of those failures? So you have the propensity for those first set of failures. What is the mitigation for those failures? What is the propensity of that mitigation to survive or to fix the initial failure? And you have that cascading set of mitigated failures. And that actually is a spreadsheet that you can use to calculate your true risk level for the aircraft. And that's the approach we take. And that's kind of the process that you use for type certification or design verification anyway. And it definitely borrows from aviation. But again, maybe I'm making this sound easy. This is actually the most difficult part of what we're doing.
Bobby, for you to meet your financial objectives the next couple of years, what kind of payload does your drone have to be carrying? And geographically, where do you have to be flying?
We believe that the true cost to operate one of these deliveries is about $1. And therefore, we believe that the unit economics are very, very attractive for this industry. Our current payload, we're limited to 3 kilos, which is 6.5 pounds. And in terms of volume, 30,000 cubic centimeters. So don't ask me to convert that to cubic inches. It's enough for McDonald's for 6 or 7 people. That's the way to think about it. But weight-wise, so the constraint isn't really weight. The constraint is more volume. So you can handle more weight easily with an aircraft by traveling shorter distance or adding more energy. So that's kind of simple problem to solve. Volume is a much more difficult problem to solve because your aircraft needs to get bigger. And as the aircraft gets bigger, you create more wind resistance because our cargo flies internally. So we believe from the data, and don't forget, we're working with some of the biggest brands out there with very, very large delivery volume. We believe from the data that the current characteristics of our aircraft will take about 98% of demand for high frequency items like takeaway food, perishable items like coffee, cakes, and what we call the single basket grocery, i.e. the grocery, convenience store grocery or single basket large grocery store items. So therefore, that on its own is a super, super gigantic high margin business. And then we can think about other use cases like long range. So if you look at the Amazon Prime Air aircraft, that's designed for long range, big cargo. I don't think the right decision. You look at the wing aircraft, which is a superb bit of engineering. Again, long range, but lighter weight, lower volume cargo. we don't think we're perfect, but we think that we're the most correct of all the current platforms. And so use case and demand and coverage, we think we're at over the 80th, even over the 90th percentile. And margin, we're pretty confident that it's a very high margin business.
Do you have to fly in North America to meet your 5-year business objectives?
We will be flying in North America this year. We've actually got 3 sites that we're evaluating at the moment, and timeline we're expecting to be there June, July this year.
I've done a lot with communities as it relates to visual and audio noise and the like. How big of an obstacle is this, or is this not something you're concerned about, and why?
Yeah, very aware of it. So if you not concerned, very aware. So if you survey folks, if they haven't experienced the service, they will be. You'll get a number of them that are concerned about noise. In order of priority, they're concerned about noise, privacy, job loss, and then safety. Right, those are the things that they compare. Wildlife as well is in there somewhere in the mix. Noise is not an issue for us. So we've done a number of studies, independent studies, where we're absolutely sure that we make less noise even than an electric car driving past. And empirically, we have 0 complaints out of 45,000 people that we've served for 2 years. So it's not the whole world saying they agree with it, but I know by listening to our aircraft, you can't hear it when it travels overhead a cruise. We don't have any complaints, and we have the scientific data to back it up that noise is not an issue. Privacy is not an issue for us because we don't record anything and we have no recording equipment on board. So that we know that we're airtight on privacy. However, it's a massive issue of perception around the world, right? So privacy is one of the most negative narratives around drones, where people have flown their hobby drones into their neighbor's house, peering through the window, all those negative associations with drones. But that's not going to, obviously we don't need to do that, and we're not going to be making money out of data that we collect as we fly. We're not going to be selling or even storing customer data, so that one isn't a worry. And then the final one, job loss, is something I frequently have to address, but again, that's an area where multiple reports have been written, and all concluding that drones and drone delivery and automation of last mile is a net creator of jobs, simply through the efficiencies that it brings for commerce and the ability for smaller, more distributed vendors to be able to compete, with the big tech companies. It's going to be a job creator, job protector, and a job creator. The loser in the equation when we scale out is the delivery driver or delivery cyclist. But that's going to benefit the economy. It's going to benefit the environment. It's going to benefit the consumer. So I think net, all of the concerns typically associated with our space, they're not real concerns.
How does weather typically restrict your flight operations to the point where you have to ground the drones? And how does that affect your customer retention or satisfaction? What do we as an industry need to do in order to be able to provide customers a consistent and predictable level of service?
Yeah, so there's 2 ways the weather affects you. The number one is weather actually slows you down. Right? So wind costs you energy, and energy costs you money, right? So you have to scale your energy or your battery for the worst case wind plus 50%. And so, wind as a parameter or as a constraint just has a bearing on your cost per unit. But our cost per unit of energy, and I don't mean the energy that goes into the battery, but the actual battery itself, is a reasonably big part of our unit cost, but not sufficiently big that we worry about it. So therefore, the real constraint with wind is flyability of the aircraft, and our aircraft can fly in 18 meter per second winds, and that means that we can fly in. We're in Ireland. We've been a year and a half on the west coast of Ireland. You can't play around the golf for 6 months of the year in Ireland because of the weather, and we're flying in it. So we're comfortable that and not just us, but anyone can engineer a drone to fly in most weather conditions, including rain, fog, all of these things. So long as you don't use sensors on your aircraft that are dependent on certain weather conditions or daytime. Like we're flying in nighttime, we should add as well, in complete darkness and no issues. The only issue, I think, the 2 issues that we haven't solved yet weather-wise, one is heat. So, batteries start to fall off an efficiency cliff after 40 degrees Celsius. And there's plenty of economies that are 45 and upwards. Like if I go to Phoenix, Arizona, for example, I'm going to have a problem there if I don't find a way to cool my batteries. So there's definitely issues there. And similarly for freezing conditions, it provides a slight difficulty, but not too much. And then the big one that I think no aviation regulator will license anyone to fly in is icing conditions. So that's freezing fog conditions, but those aren't, at least for most of the population of Europe and USA, you don't have those icing conditions too often. There are ways to engineer around it. We haven't, but there are ways to engineer around it. But certainly, I don't think, I'd be surprised if we were anything less than 98% availability in European weather.
Bobby, let's say we had on our call right now, let's say an investor who really knew the drone market. Let's say we had the head of last mile delivery for Amazon, and let's say an expert in drones. What would be the three things that would most excite them about what you're doing? And why would they be most skeptical?
So the thing that gets people most excited when they talk to us is they say, how the hell did you get this far with so little money? And they get excited about it. They want to know about that. They're interested. They want to come and see it. And they do, like we invite it, we're pretty open book here. So anyone that wants to come and see our operation can come and see it. And they get excited by how simple it is. A lot of people overthink what we're doing here. And really the only thing that you need to be thinking about is safety and reliability. That's really it. And that's an equation. It's hard work, but it's an equation. And if I look at what some companies have taken on or their approaches to it, they've made it really, really complicated. And so if I think about we've got some really great aviation experts on our team that know about, some of our guys have designed UAVs that have millions of flight hours on them and have done long range and all sorts of operations. So, the team come from pretty strong pedigree of aviation. But if I were to bring the big guys, and I don't like to name Amazon, but I'll bring Amazon, we don't have the constraints that Amazon have. And maybe Amazon are engineering for Amazon Prime customers, and they're looking at the data, and the data tells them they need to fly 20 miles and need to fly 10-pound packages, all those things. But, I'd have turned that upside down with wearing my startup hat, and I'd said, what the world actually wants and what drones can solve is coffee. Perishable products traveling short distances at high frequency. And so I think it's not that we're better or smarter or dumber or anything than either our own competitors of our size or of the giants. It's simply we first looked at the problem to solve and then designed the aircraft. We haven't designed the aircraft looking for a problem to solve with it.
Given your many successes with Elon and with car trawler and the like, what have you brought to Manna that came from your successful experience?
Not much, I'd like to claim that success makes me a better founder, but I don't think it does. This is my fourth startup. My last one, as you said, car trawler, was a very successful, big hit. One before that as well. The first one was actually video games. I built a load of video games, big, huge video games, and they were a disaster. And, I carry those mistakes and personality traits and defects through with me the whole way. So I actually don't think the success and experience I have make a massive difference, but they make some difference in scaling. Certainly, my last business was $300 million ARR. So you learn some things there. But, if I think about what makes me a good founder of this business is I'm still a programmer, right? I'm still writing code. So I have a really very connected relationship with my team and with the hardware and with the product. And that helps me, believe it or not, the technical details help me formulate the strategy, and the strategy helps me formulate the technical details. So I think that thread in me, the programmer thread, is carried away through all of my businesses. And I will never change that. I will always stay in the engine room when I build a business, and it serves me very well. So maybe that's, the point there.
On that point, what was it like for a software guy such as yourself to come into the aviation industry?
Well, It's interesting. I would like to say we are in the aviation industry, but we're skirting up along the sides of the aviation industry, and it's a little bit frightening. And certainly when, well, I won't name markets, but in certain markets, it's really overthought. It's way more complex than it needs to be, and that's kind of a little bit frustrating. But at the same time, we're moving very quickly forward, so it's not really holding us back. But as a programmer, there's some systems in aviation, right? Despite all of their claims around safety, decades of safety culture, and all those things, we still have events that happen that slip through the net. So I think that we have to be honest and we have to be pragmatic about what we can do to prevent safety. And as an engineer, to me, that means simplicity. If you want something to be reliable, you make it simple. So you delete features, you delete complexity, you delete layers constantly so that you can predict where the weaknesses are and you can measure where the weaknesses are and you can prove those measurements through iterative cycles, through empirical data by running test flights. So I definitely, there's certainly strong parallels between the way Manna's tech stack is built and the video games industry, or even my last business, very strong parallels about static analysis and verification of your code through peer review and through regression testing. But then there's systems in aviation that are just crazy levels of complex, and some of them definitely deliver safety, but they're probably too much overhead for us. So long story short, I think, I keep an eye on it, but I'm going to try and bring the industry towards a place where we're pragmatic about what drones are and we adopt fit for purpose regulations and constraints around this industry rather than adopt, the decades of traditional aviation.
Bob, you've mentioned Manna could be a spectacular success or failure, one way or the other. If there was a competitor you were most concerned about, who is it?
I'm not. So there's nobody that I'm concerned about today. If I was concerned about a competitor, it's the one I don't know yet, that has the same strategy as us, a team as good as us, that raises more capital than we do. Because pretty soon, the guy with the most capital is the winner in this space. Right now, that's not the case. It's about getting to a product that's scalable. But we'll soon be at that place where we're ready to scale, and then it's going to be a capital game. And if you get outgunned in this space, there's going to be markets you won't be able to afford to enter quickly enough, and whoever goes into that market first will take a dominant leadership position. It will be very difficult to displace. So that's kind of, there are no competitors that I worry about today, but I would like to heap praise on the Wing team. And even though they're a competitor, in theory, I think, number one, the world is plenty big enough. This is a multiple $1 trillion industry. I'd be happy to share it half and half with Alphabet. And number two, in the end, their strategy is slightly different than ours, and they do plan to be a consumer brand and compete directly with the very brands and partners that we plan to provide a service to. So I think they're the ones that I tip my hat to and say those guys have defined, I think, success in the industry to date, but we do plan to overtake them.
Once we, as an industry, have drones that have reached the safety and all the other thresholds that you consider is a prerequisite for scale, how many drone OEMs do you think that ultimately the market will settle on? What's a better analogy? Is it the automotive market or the aviation market?
That's a great question. It's probably a hybrid, and you could also throw in regulatory constraints and airspace constraints as well. And then you could also throw in certain brand constraints. If you think about, there's certain must-have brands in our space, and I won't name them, but there's certain products and food providers and things like that are absolute must-haves. And because of the physical nature of what we do, we're essentially not just the aircraft manufacturer, not just the airline, but we're also the airport. And the restaurant or the brand becomes that airport. So there's a almost monopoly advantage to a first mover here in powering those big brands that's slightly different. So if I were to count the number, I'd be very surprised if there was more than 4 or 5 worldwide giant operators in this space. And the reason that is that the regulatory starting gun in Europe has been fired, and the race starts January 1st, 23. And there's nobody else right now ready to scale other than really nearly us and definitely Wing. And so I think that it's going to be too difficult for smaller players to start with a 2-year disadvantage. However, in the United States, because that regulatory gun has not been fired, and because scale is probably another maybe a year, possibly 2 years behind Europe, I think there's potential for others to catch up and for all to be waiting behind that starting line when everything kicks off. But I hope to bring the time advantage from Europe into the United States when we start there.
Do you think that those 4 to 5 operators already exist today?
I think they don't exist today. I think there's us and Wing. I think Amazon will do something, but I don't think they're in a rush. So right now there's us and Wing, in my view, and that might be unfair to others, but I'm honestly calling it the way I see it. I do think there'll be more entrants this year. I see a lot of decks flying around. I see a lot of startups at the seed stage doing something quite similar to ours. So I think this year you will see some new entrants that potentially have very strong teams and good funding behind them. But today it's us and Wing, and maybe you might see 4 or 5 new entrants around the world, different markets coming out this year, and we'll see 2023 will define who survives.
What remaining gaps do you see existing for entrepreneurs to go and solve?
So actually the biggest unsolved issue in our industry is sense and avoid. And so there's 2, right? There's battery energy density, and must be 500 battery companies that have great tech but no ability to produce batteries at scale. So if entrepreneurs really want to make a ton of money and solve the energy density equation for batteries, and there's no saying liar battery supplier, and it applies, because I must have met 20 battery companies with great tech but unable to sell us a pack. So that one. But another one that we can survive with current battery tech, it'll just be improved bottom line for us. That improves. The big one is sense and avoid. So the avoid part of sense and avoid is easy. That's just tactical deconfliction and standard routing and simple rules. But the sense part, so how do you detect someone illegally flying a miniature DJI drone at 50 miles an hour towards you? How do you spot that? And how do you prevent those strikes? How do you prevent very large bird strikes? Those kind of things. So that's something that nobody has solved, but there's promise there, right? So there's lightweight radar solutions that have great promise that we're evaluating that we think may very well solve the problem. And if they do, it's kind of the last risk that we have not mitigated. We haven't seen it yet in our 95,000 flights, but it's going to happen at scale. And in order for the industry to scale safely to those multiple millions of flights a day, we need to be able to have very lightweight sensors, most likely radar, that correctly identifies the vectors of alien objects.
How do you solve that concern today? Or I guess maybe you don't, because it's all based within visual line of sight flight. But as you move towards BVLOS towards the end of the year, how are you thinking about solving detect and avoid?
We think we have got it solved, and it is with lightweight radar. We're in testing at the moment. We do think it's solved. Some vendors aren't going to like it though, because it's expensive. But luckily, our strategy with our aircraft has been build an aircraft that lasts, that has a useful life of 2 to 3 years and a useful function of at least several 100,000 flights. And therefore, our capital cost is quite high in the aircraft, and we can afford to put those sensors on. And whereas an aircraft that's designed to be low cost, cookie cutter, that's going to have problems, because to add those sensors probably breaks those business models. And
right.
We do think technically, I'm not certain. I'll be honest with you, I'm not certain. But currently in our initial tests, it looks like the sensors that we're looking at will be able to solve. And the problem to solve is 50 to 100 meters out, getting a solid vector on an object, and from that vector you know if there's an intersection or not. And that's all we really need to be BVLOS and not be concerned about illegal drones or big birds.
I think that's a very interesting discussion ongoing in the industry about what the mix is between onboard sensing capability, where you add sensors and need a lot of times angular coverage that perhaps exceeds the energy and weight and cost budgets, versus offloading some of that detect and avoid capability, or detect capability to ground-based infrastructure. Each has its pros and cons, obviously, but my intuition was that for the low-value items to be moved around in commodity drones, ultimately, I think that mix should favor perhaps leveraging ground-based infrastructure.
Well,
Detecting.
let me argue against that, right? So, I mean, one of our aircraft's already done 20,000 delivery flights, one aircraft, and we fully expect that aircraft to do 100,000 flights. That's, in terms of revenue, that's a significant amount of revenue. So if you amortize the cost of capital over its useful life, it's negligible, the cost of those onboard radars. So the question, I think the starting question should be, which is the most effective? We know ground-based radar can be highly effective, but it's also $500,000 a unit. And that ain't going to work in suburban America or even suburban Europe for that matter. So who pays for that ground-based infrastructure if that's what's required? So we'll see. I certainly have not confidence, but I have a lot of hope for the onboard radar system, and let's just see where we end up.
Yeah, I do too.
Is there anything that we haven't asked about men and about drones that you'd like to talk about?
You're doing pretty well so far, guys. I think the one thing I always think that's unusual about this business is that it's going to be a long time before we're profitable or even generating a ton of cash. So it's one of those big moonshot businesses that requires a lot of capital and investors that believe in the size of the space, the viability of the space, and the big vision around truly changing society and enabling, new functions of commerce or new angles of commerce. So it's been one of those, like I've had bootstrap businesses, I've had businesses that were private equity backed, and this business is venture backed. And the biggest difference and unusual thing about this business is we're almost promising the future now, and we're trying to show signs of that happening. And that's an unusual business to have to run.
Right. Who are 3 people in business, or let's say in the drone business, that you turn to for advice?
Yeah, that's funny. So my investors are probably listening, but it is true. And the 2 of my investors I frequently turn to for advice. And that's unusual because my last owners in my last business were bankers, and I never talked to them about anything other than money. So I go to my existing venture investors and I have regular catch-up calls with them on various different subjects. And then, I've had the pleasure of meeting some really amazing people, and I seek them out. I find them and I go to them for advice. And there's 2 people. One of them now works for me, Andrew Patton, who I believe. And Andrew has a lot of experience in drone delivery. He has a lot of experience in aviation, and he's also very strong business mind. And he now heads up our USA business. So he's the CEO of our USA business. And him and I speak quite a lot on subjects, all ranging subjects around our strategy. And, I was a solo founder of this business, and this is my first time being a solo founder. And I actually don't like it, because you want to have somebody to no holds barred bounce your thinking off and, confront the strategy that you have and talk about, difficult decisions. And so certainly, from running the business point of view, I've been lucky to find really great team members, and Andrew would be high up on that list. And then, we recently, hired as an advisor Ziggy Zerwek, who spent, 15 years in General Atomics and a number of years in other drone delivery businesses, and brings with him just an absolute mine of aviation and safety knowledge. So aviation knowledge, safety systems, how to design an aircraft to meet your con ops, how to design an aircraft to fly millions of hours, all those things. And he's just brought us up such a level of, we were all already doing pretty well, but you're always looking to level up, right? To turbocharge your team. And we've been very lucky to meet these number of individuals that have come on board now and help us to get to the next level. And then other advisors, there's nothing better than speaking to the average Joe Soap. And I personally spend a lot of time driving and walking around the streets of North Dublin, where we operate our service. and I listen to the people that use our service and the people that don't use our service, and I listen to the stores and the businesses that are thinking about using our services or that aren't. And I won't say that they're giving me advice, but I'm drawing and making a lot of my decisions on the little things that they say and the nuances in those conversations.
Bobby, let's say we got a bunch of new entrepreneurs on the call and they're asking you for advice, and I'm sure you get the questions all the time. What one piece of advice would you give for an entrepreneur in starting a business, whether it's in drones or whether it's in aviation or in any area?
Network. So, I mean, the biggest, most important thing for me building Manna has been my network of people that I've worked with before, that have started with me. So Manna's 95 people in the company now. 25 of them have worked for me before in various businesses. And so I was able to start the business pretty much instantly with a great team. And that team and the network of people that you've worked with in the past or that you're just talking to are so valuable to you when you're starting up a business. So, I hate to think that a startup in its first 3 years is hiring people that they don't know about. You should be able to, through your network and through your network's network, one person removed, be able to find great people that are known quantities. So network has served me very well. And also coming into Manna, it was my network from my previous business that actually led to the first seed investment from FFVC in New York. And again, I point to, I was able to pick up the phone to some of my network in Ireland and in the UK, and immediately get access to all the top VCs and walk in the door with a great warm reference in my fundraising journey. And then the next part of that is everybody I meet, I'm hiring. Everybody I talk to, every conference I'm on, every panel I'm on, every tech meetup, whatever, I'm talking to that person, I'm learning from that person, but I'm always, I won't say in a privacy abusing way, but I'm taking notes. And I'm constantly building a list of people that at some point we can work together on things. And if I give you a small example, I was browsing through a tech meetup in Venezuela last month, and I met this guy in a university down there that's building a robotic winch, and he's a great mechanical engineer, robotics engineer, and I ended up hiring him. And he's coming to Ireland now. He's just going to be a member of the team, and I'm confident he'll be great. But that's me, the CEO, getting out there into the ditch, wading in, learning from people that are building things themselves, and using that to build my network and using that to build my hiring pipeline. So that's my advice to founders is that is your job. It should be fun. You should enjoy it. You should learn from it, but it is your job to be constantly building that network.
As you're networking, you're meeting these people who potentially could be founders and successful business people of the future. What couple of things do you look for in somebody and you think this guy or gal is going to make it?
Attitude. 100%. The first thing I care about is the attitude of the person. Aptitude is obviously important, but very difficult to test, very difficult to measure. Attitude you can measure straight away when you meet somebody. And we're a company that's full of very experienced people that are good mentors, and also lots of inexperienced people that are up to being mentored, so they have the right attitude. And when you're in a startup, everyone needs to take responsibility for everything. So that culture of owning things, being responsible for things, proactively finding a way forward yourself, or proactively knowing that there's a gap there that needs to be addressed. That all comes down to common attribute of attitude in a person. So it is by far the number one thing. And I won't name names, but in my organization, the people that I have here, without fail, all have great attitudes. They're all team players, but most importantly, they can work on their own. They can proactively see what needs to be done next. That means that you need a low management overhead and low process overhead to actually move things forward, because everyone is rowing in the right direction, or if they're not, they'll be helped to row in the correct direction. So attitude, any day of the week, it's about attitude.
Bobby, if you fast forward 5 years and then 10 years out, what does the industry look like?
In 5 years, the industry will be not ubiquitous, but real serious scaling across Europe and the United States and lots of other markets for that matter. So I would expect the full rollout hasn't happened, but most of the large suburbs and most of the large markets will have drone delivery. In fact, I'd say that with a high degree of confidence. In 10 years, I'd expect other use cases to emerge. I would expect that, every suburban and metro area to have drone delivery as a full replacement for road-based delivery. But I'd also see other use cases. So you'll definitely see, passenger transport, through UAVs, UAM, and I would also see longer range things. So the energy equation will have moved on quite a bit in 10 years' time. So I would expect to have at least double, if not more, the energy density, and therefore aircraft being able to carry bigger things, longer distances. And so you'll start to see other use cases emerge and potentially facilitating, more what I would call urban sprawl, but good type urban sprawl, where people that live in suburbs that are currently not able to get access to great things like last mile delivery to be able to get it. And I would say in 10 years, that to be ubiquitous.
What do you think is the most common misconception or misunderstanding on the topic of drone deliveries?
The common misunderstanding is that it's not viable simply, and for a number of different reasons. People incorrectly think that it's too expensive or it's technically not possible to do it, all these different things. So that's one, but that's a question that's easily answered just with our existing data. So that one's put to bed. Just a lot of people have that perception. But definitely the big one is that drones are bad, drones are noisy, drones are invading privacy. Just the word drone is a negative word. And so that's kind of it's just the mood music around drones. And the current situation in Ukraine is going to, cause even more problems in that regard. But it's just the way it is. Drone today is a negative word, and that we will change that. But for now, that's the biggest misconception, is that drones are a bad thing.
Bob, if you wanted to give one message as a result of this discussion to our audience, what would it be?
Drone delivery is real. It's live today, commercially viable today. It's live in a number of markets, and that, customers or residents of certainly most European countries can expect to see this in their backyard in the next 2 years. And the message is that it's real. And it's time now to start getting involved and thinking about how it affects both your way you live and also, if you're a business, how that might work to your advantage.
Tell us about fundraising. Where do you stand, and what's the future look like?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, it's a capital intensive space, and we're ahead of the product curve but behind the revenue curve, and that's going to be the case for a number of years. So to date, we've raised over $30 million. We just did our Series A last April, which was a $25 million Series A. We'll likely go out on our Series B roadshow next quarter, so think June onwards.
And what kind of a raise will that be, Bobby?
That'd be chunky enough raise. Our A was 25 million, so it's likely in the $50 to $100 million range.
Luca, any other questions from you?
No, this was an amazing hour and a half spent with you, Bobby. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of those insights.
Likewise, I enjoyed it.
Thanks again, Bobby.
All right, see you guys. Bye-bye.
All right, that's a wrap for today. Thank you for listening to the Vertical Space Podcast. Reach out if there are topics that you would like us to discuss, and goodbye until the next episode. Unless mentioned, this podcast is in no way endorsing or promoting any person and or company mentioned, and all opinions within the podcast are solely that of the presenters. The Vertical Space makes no guarantees, warranty, or representation of any information given in this podcast. Any information given is for informational purposes and should be used at your own risk. This podcast is for general, educational, and entertainment purposes only.